I start to share my story, just off the top of my head. And before I knew it, all of these grown men were sobbing. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I did not expect that. Because I will say that society, movies, TV shows, the news has made prison out to be something that seems very scary. And I would vouch to say that it's really not like that at all. And so I was very surprised by how they reacted. And of course, they were like, thank you so much for sharing your story. I have never heard before that I am forgiven.
Shelby, welcome to the happy hour.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on the happy hour, even though you're probably not old enough to go to a real happy hour. Am I right?
Unfortunately not, no.
Not yet. Not yet. Welcome to the show. I am overwhelmed with joy to have you on the show. And I met you this year in February at the Therefore conference, which Tiffany Daniels has been on the show before. And so my listeners are familiar with that. And I met you there. And I'm going to set it up how I met you. Okay.
Yeah, do it.
And then you can come in. So Tiffany, my friend, she's like, hey, I want you to interview this girl. She's young. She told me parts of your story and I want you to interview her. And, you know, she's like, you can carry the conversation. Like, you'll do great. Not like talking that you couldn't, but just like, okay, like this is like a young girl that you're interviewing.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I'm thinking you're going to tell your story in this podcast so people will hear it. But I'm thinking in my mind, like, she's been through a lot. Like, this is heavy. Our conversation's about grief and trauma and all the things. And so I'm going to have to like really just like be the grandma here and carry the conversation. And we get on stage and I was like, well, you don't even need me up here because Shelby's just fine by herself. So that was my first interaction with you. And I knew this girl is going to do amazing things. So there you go. So introduce yourself to my listeners.
Yeah, my name is Shelby Houston. I am a senior at Dallas Baptist University. I'm finishing up school in December. I'm getting married in August. And right now I'm kind of juggling a bunch of things, but traveling, speaking, hopefully writing a book here soon. And so it's been super fun.
Okay, that's really exciting, Shelby. I did not know that.
Yes.
Well, go Patriots.
Go Pats.
I spent I don't know if I told you this because I sometimes do not give this information out freely. I spent my first 2 years of college at Dallas Baptist.
What?
Did I tell you that?
No.
See, I do not throw that information out. And I can't even believe I'm saying it on the podcast because, Shelby, when I was at DBU, I was wild and crazy and did not love Jesus. And so when I meet people who are around my same age, and they tell me they went to DBU, I like don't want to tell them because I'm like, no, we did not run in the same crowd.
Yeah.
So
that's incredible.
I wish to say that I would have been friends with you, but I probably wouldn't have. So.
No, we're probably not.
But I apologize. But now I love Jesus.
Yeah, thank God.
Praise him. Praise him. Well, congrats on all of the things and getting married. I want to talk to you about that a little bit at the end and finishing school and what God has for you. But really, I'm happy to have this conversation with you today. And I remember when I interviewed you on that stage for Therefore, I thought this is going to be really, really powerful, even though I knew that I didn't know how you were going to be able to tell your story. I left there, like I said, like all joking aside, very impressed with the poise that you had, the confidence that you had to talk about something so difficult. And so I want to talk about your life and what you have had to walk through and where you are today and what led you to doing prison ministry. People who've been listening know that for the past 3 weeks, we've been talking about incarceration in some form or the other. We had Brandon and then Lacey and then Fox and Rob. And so it somehow turned into a series that I didn't know was happening. And you're the bow to that series. Yes. And so I want you to take us back wherever you want to start with the story. If you want to start in December of 2021, or if you want to go further than that, I want you to take us back to how you got today to be young Shelby who's going into prisons talking about forgiveness.
Yeah. So it's actually really funny. My dad was a police officer for 21 years. And I would say probably about 2 years prior to his death, the Ted Bundy documentary came out on Netflix. And I've always kind of been one of those crime junkie fans. And so I watched that documentary. And at the end, there's the last episode, it shows him on death row. And there's this huge crowd outside of the prison, basically waiting for Ted to be killed. And I started sobbing. And I was like,
Mm.
what in the world? I was like, why am I crying right now?
Yeah.
And I was like, I felt so passionate about it, but I was like, my heart was also so broken, yet part of me like understood. And so I remember talking to my dad and my mom about it, just so broken up over this documentary. And then flash forward, I guess, to 2021, whenever this happened with my dad. Um, I made the decision really early on to forgive the man who shot my father, but I remember feeling like, oh my goodness, like this is clicking, like this makes
Mm.
sense. Like 2 years ago when I watched this documentary so broken up about this man who was on death row getting killed, like I'm in that story now.
Mm.
And so that completely like shook my world, and it was also just like confirmation from the Lord, like, yeah, I prepared you for this like a long time
Wow.
ago. And so whenever I got up to do the eulogy at his funeral, I knew right away that I was going to forgive this man. And that road is going to be really hard, and it's not
Mhm.
always going to be easy, but just looking back now, like getting to walk into prisons and share my story, and then, standing on the other side of, what these guys have done or these women have done to other families or what has gone on in their lives. Like, I'm on the other side of that. But for
Mhm.
them to hear, like, I forgive you from someone on the other side is so powerful. And so it's been really cool to see how the Lord has prepared me a long time ago for this, and then just how he's been faithful to bring me through it.
I love that, and I didn't know that part of your story about the documentary. And there was a not a documentary, but what came out recently about Ted Bundy, like a show.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't watched it, but my boys and my husband watched it, and I remember there was a time when they were all watching it, maybe last year or something, and there were a bunch of high school kids upstairs in our
Hmm.
game room, and we were talking with them about the show.
Yeah.
And one of the kids said, because Ted Bundy had a profession of faith towards the end of his life,
Right.
and
Right.
became a believer and was
Hmm.
baptized and all the things. And one of the boys was like, "How could God love him?
Yeah.
Like how could he claim to be a Christian?" And
Yeah.
so we had a really like great conversation with these
Hmm.
boys up there. And I actually from that conversation did a little research, Shelby, and found the book of the pastor who baptized him. And so
No
it's on my
way.
to read. I want to read it this
Oh,
summer. And
yeah.
so
You've got to
I'll
send
link
me
it.
that.
I'll send it to you when we get done, and I'll link it in the show notes as well. But
Yeah.
that's just so interesting about that conversation.
Hmm.
So let's go back. Your dad was a police officer for 21 years, and you were a college student. You were in college when your
Hmm.
dad's life was taken. And so I want to play a little bit of that eulogy from when you said that. So listen to this right here.
There has been anger, sadness, grief, and confusion, and part of me wishes I could despise the man who did this to my father, but I can't get any part of my heart to hate him. All that I can find is myself hoping and praying for this man to truly know Jesus. My prayer is that someday down the road, I'd get to spend some time with the man who shot my father. Not to scream at him, not to yell at him, not to scold him, simply to tell him about Jesus.
Shelby, that's amazing and unbelievable. I want to talk about when you made the decision to talk about forgiveness in your eulogy. What was it and when was it? Why did you think this was the time for me to publicly proclaim, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to forgive this man?
Yeah, so leading up to the funeral, we had about a week. And so it was the day after I had found out my dad had passed. I was at home. Of course, I didn't sleep that night. And so I got up really early and I went and sat on the front porch just to kind of get some air. And so I sat on the front porch and I remember just talking to God and being like, I don't really know what to say to you right now. Um, I don't know what to do, but I started to feel just this tug in my heart, like, no, you need to speak at his funeral. And so that was something that I was like ready to do, but like I was like, what do I even say?
Mm.
And so I remember the Lord bringing this image to my mind of him hanging on the cross. And I remember it almost felt like I was like looking in his eyes. and like the sad, suffering eyes. And I remember he just, quietly nudged me and said, I did this for you, but I also did this for Jaime. And I was like, okay.
Wow.
And so I knew, like, who am I to take that forgiveness away from him? And so that's kind of what the heartbeat was behind that eulogy and kind of where it came from. He just kept bringing that image to my mind, and he still brings that image to my mind. And it'll stop me in my tracks, but I have to remember to forgive him all over again. And it's a daily thing. And so that's kind of what I talked about in the eulogy. And I think a lot of people would not have been confused or surprised if I hated the guy, if I wanted him to die, if, like, I think they would think, yeah, that's like acceptable. And so whenever I said that, everyone was like, where is this coming from? Like, how do you get that? And so I think that's kind of what made it, take off the way that it did, because people want that. Like, people want to know, like, how do I forgive like that? How do I live like that? And I think, even today I get asked, like, do you still mean that? Like, do you still mean what you said? And my answer is yes. It's always been yes. But it's also like, that was not me up there. Like, that was Jesus. And so that was really special for me. And it has changed my life and kind of the walk that I've had in grief. A lot of people think that, whenever you make a decision like that, you're kind of stuffing those feelings away. You're not truly grieving. But no, it actually frees you up a lot more.
Wow. You that was 18 months ago, and a lot in your life has changed since then. You would probably say because of what you've done and said. Yeah, your whole trajectory of your life has changed. I can't help but think about how that's been for you as a young woman who lost her dad unexpectedly, to almost be thrust into the spotlight about forgiveness. Through a circumstance that is terrible, like the worst.
Yeah.
And so I want to hear from you. What has it been like for you to grieve well while also ministering to people about forgiveness? I mean, this is big and heavy. And so you're like, all of a sudden, like, here's Shelby. She's our spokesperson for forgiveness. And yet you lost your dad.
Yeah.
And so how has that journey been for you, and how have you found strength to keep doing that?
Yeah. So I would say really early on, I always kind of had a passion for speaking and writing. And so it did feel really natural and exciting for me to get to do all of that. But also, I was really faced with, okay, your life is now like put out there for a lot of people to see. And so what do you do whenever you have really hard days? Like, how do you, continue doing ministry and talking about this story over and over and over? And I found that a lot of people want vulnerability. A lot of people want you to talk about the hard things. And so I found that I can talk about the story about what happened with my dad all the time. And I could put a bow on it every time, but I found that people are okay without a bow. And so I have been committed to being really vulnerable. And so I have shared multiple times of the hard days and how I feel and the late nights whenever I miss my dad. And so people have been really encouraged by that, which I thought would kind of be the opposite. And so that's kind of how I continue doing what I do, because had I had to put a bow on it every single time, like, I would get tired. I would run out. But being able to talk about how I feel and the grief and the journey of that with being like really raw and vulnerable, but also saying like, here I am. It's not always rainbows and butterflies, and forgiveness is not easy, but it's possible with Jesus. And so it's been really encouraging for me, and it's what keeps me going, to kind of have an outlet to be like, yeah, your life is out there for a lot of people to see, but Shelby, you can be raw, you can be real, you can be vulnerable, and it's what people need. People need that.
You know, and it would be unsustainable for you to try to put
Oh
a
yeah.
bow on this all the time. I
Right.
mean, you would just, and you would be
No, yeah.
fake and you'd be phony,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
people probably would be like, I don't want what she has because this doesn't feel
Right.
like real life.
Right.
But
Yeah.
real life is like, I'm hurting still. Forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make me not hurt. Like
Right.
I think you
Exactly.
said it makes it easier, but you still have grief.
Oh yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, you're still walking into
100%.
that. Have you ever spent time thinking, Shelby, about what your dad would think about you right now?
I actually get asked that often. I was in therapy, I guess last week, and he was like, do you think about like how proud your dad would be of you? And honestly, I love to think about that. Um, Obviously, it makes me want to curl up into a ball and cry, but um, and I've said this before. I think if I could talk to my dad, I think he would say, Shelby, I think it was worth it. And so that has kind of been really the backbone of my strength is like, yeah, I wish my dad was here. Like, I wish I could talk to him again. I wish I could hug him again. But I think, if I could talk to him and be like, Dad, would you take it back? I don't think he would. Just because of all of the lives that have been changed and the eternities that have been shifted because of it.
That's a really bold statement to say, Shelby.
Yeah.
You know, since that day in December, your life has changed a lot, and it has like opened up a lot of doors for you to do prison ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was on the Relevant podcast, which I co-host, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I texted you about this.
Yeah.
And we were doing a story about Russell Wilson and his
Yes.
wife Sierra going into what city was it in? Denver, Miami, going into a prison in Miami and doing work. And so I brought the story to Relevant, and I was like, but you guys, this is not about Russell or Sierra. This is about my friend Shelby, because you were there with them. And I'm like, forget Russell. Who cares? Shelby Houston, my girl, was there. And so you've been able to have a lot of conversations with men who are on the other side of your journey. They are the I don't know if the correct word would be, they're the perpetrator. They're the one that committed the crime.
Yeah.
Whereas you would be the victim of that. And so I want to hear from you. What has it been like for you to tell your story to these men and women who are sitting on the other side and who are in prison because of something that happened, like just like your dad, like Jaime, how he took your dad's life. And so how has that been for them and for you as well?
Yeah. So I guess it was last summer. My friend Bob Goff, he reached out to me and he was like, hey, I'd really love for you to come to San Quentin with me. And I was like, okay. It's the first time I had ever been in a prison, but I was like, sure. And his wife, Maria, had never gone. And she was like, if you'll go, I'll go. And I was like, okay, we're doing this thing. So I ended up going, and what I thought was going to be a really, chill day, I was just kind of step back and watch everything. I remember I walked into San Quentin, and I was like, this is not what I expected, first of all. But then whenever we started the class, Bob got up there to talk to the guys, and he was like, I have a friend here, Shelby. She's going to come up here and share her story. And I was like,
so Bob Goff, for sure.
What? I was like, what did you just say?
Yeah.
And so, of course, all the guys like turn and look at me, and I'm like, okay. So I get up there and I'm like, thank you, Bob. And so I start to share my story, just off the top of my head. And before I knew it, all of these grown men were sobbing. And I was like, whoa. I was like, I did not expect that. Because I will say that society, movies, TV shows, the news has made prison out to be something that seems very scary. And I would vouch to say that it's really not like that at all. And so I was very surprised by how they reacted to my story. And so afterwards, we got to, break up into some small groups. And I got to hear all of these guys tell me their story. And And of course, they were like, "Thank you so much for sharing your story. I have never heard before that I am forgiven."
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh my goodness." And so it was like finally they felt humanized again. And so it clicked for me. I was like, "Oh, like this is why God had me, watch that documentary years ago. This is why these events had to happen on December 3rd." And so that was a really cool moment for me, but I didn't know how often I was going to get to do that. Well, sure enough, here recently, God Behind Bars got in contact with me, and I went out to it's the Everglades Correctional Institution, and we did a prisoner led worship night. And first of all, these guys are incredibly talented. And so they started, doing their set, and then they had me go up and share my story. And not only that, but then I got to share the gospel with them. And so that was, honestly, I'd say, top moment of my entire life. I don't know if it'll ever be topped. And so I shared my story about what happened, and I I really told them exactly what I said in my eulogy. If I really wanted to spend some time with a man who shot my father, not to scream at him, not to yell at him, not to scold him, but to tell him about Jesus. And so I got to do that with guys who are in his same shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very end, I said, if you feel like this is you tonight, like maybe you've never accepted this forgiveness, not from me, but from your heavenly Father, would you just raise your hand? And we had hands go up all over the room. And we had 33 men place their faith in Jesus for the first time. And so that was just a super humbling moment for me. Like, if this is what it was all for, man, it was worth it. And so that's been really cool. And I think that it was also just more confirmation from Jesus, like, this is where I have you. This is what I want you to do.
So is this what you want to be doing for the next years of your life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You mentioned that you wanted to be able to look at the man who took your father's life, Jaime, and extend that forgiveness to him, not just at your father's service, but really sit across him and say that.
Yeah.
And so, have you had that opportunity to do that?
Yeah, so we had my father's funeral. I mean, not his funeral. We had his trial in September of 2022. And so this trial lasted about 4 days. And whenever the trial was concluded, we got to do a victim impact statement. And so I got up there and I got to look Jaime in the eyes and kind of shared my feelings with him, but also I said, Jaime, I've prayed for this day for a really long time, and I want you to look at me whenever you hear me say that I forgive you. And not only do I forgive you, but your heavenly Father forgives you. And he shook his head and he received that.
Mm.
And so I have since connected with his kids. And after the trial, they got in contact with me. And so I met up with his daughter and his son. And I asked them, I said, how often are you getting to see your dad? Have you gotten to talk to him at all? And his daughter said, yeah, actually, I went like the other day, and she told Jaime, she said, the officer's daughter wants to talk to you. And he was like, yeah, I want to talk to her too. And so I haven't gotten to visit him in prison yet, but I'm waiting for that day. And so I'm really excited and really expectant. But she had mentioned, she said, yeah, he really wasn't he wasn't really a believer. Like, we didn't go to church, we didn't read the Bible or anything. But he started telling me all of these Bible stories whenever I went and saw him the other day. And he has a Bible, I guess, now. And I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And so I really am hopeful that he makes that decision to place his faith in Jesus, and then hopefully his kids would follow after him.
It's amazing, Shelby. If people have been listening this last couple of weeks, Brandon was on the show a week and a half ago, and I think Brandon as well.
Yeah.
And he talked about how he had a Bible that he got in prison, and
Yeah.
that is where he really changed his life. And I think there's so much opportunities for people who are kind of at what feels like the end of their rope,
Right.
and so often Jesus comes in. And I love earlier when you were talking about going into San Quentin, and I shared with Brandon as well, my experience from going into San
Mm-hmm.
Quentin was about the same. Like, you just see TV and you walk into San Quentin and you're like, wait, where
Wait,
where
yeah,
am
not the
I?
same place. Yeah.
Not the same place. And the opportunities that they're given at that particular prison, and again, it's the only one I've ever been to, so I don't know, but the opportunities they're given are just amazing. And Brandon said something that has really stuck with me and some of the people here at the office. He said, let me make sure I get it right. He said, today's prisoner is tomorrow's neighbor. And
Yes.
so he's really just talking about like what it means to rehabilitate and to pour into these men and women who are incarcerated, because he gave a percentage of how many percentage of them are going to be back into the real world.
Right.
And there is this sense of people who kind of put prisoners in this like category of like too far gone,
Yes.
no hope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Why do we care about them?
Right.
And I love that you're being a part of changing that narrative, Shelby,
Yeah.
of that these people, they're humans, they're created in God's
Mm-hmm.
image. They will be our neighbors tomorrow. Like, they
Yes. Yeah.
matter. They
Yeah.
really do matter. Um, I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and I also am just fully aware of the hardness that comes with it. So I want you to
Thank
know
you.
that I think about you and
Thank you.
pray for you, and I'm proud of you. Like, I'm like you,
Thank
like
you.
this new big sister that I'm so proud of you
Yes.
about. Okay,
Thank you.
let's switch gears just a little bit because you're about to
Yeah,
get yourself married.
I am.
Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressful is marriage planning right now?
So I would say it's about a 15 out of 10. It's like kind of the worst thing ever, but the best thing ever.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm such a type A girl. Like, whenever there's something to get done, I get it done. And so it has not been that way with planning at all. But thankfully, most of my friends were actually like in this season of all getting married. And so we've gotten to do it together,
I
which has
love
been
that.
really fun. Yeah.
I love that. Now, I don't know the answer to this, but did your dad ever meet your fiance?
He did not. No.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and so that has been something that we've really had to work through. Um Will, my fiance, that was kind of his dream, to have a father-in-law, and so he's grieving that as well.
Mm,
Um and so he had been around, but no, my dad never got to meet him.
mm. How are the emotions heading into a wedding without your dad here?
I would say I it has been a struggle. I think the closer that I get, because of course now we're doing the timeline of the day, and we've got to pick the songs that I'm going to dance to, and even thinking about the rehearsal the day before. Like, I was actually at a wedding rehearsal last night, and I got to watch one of my friends walk down the aisle with her dad, and it was just kind of that, like, stopped me in my tracks, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, you
That's
know
not going to happen for me.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so thankfully I've had just the best pastor. He was my youth pastor growing up. He was my boss at one point. He's my pastor now, but he has been like a second dad to me. And so he's going to get to walk me down the aisle, and I'll have my father-daughter dance with him. And so, of course, like, I wish my dad was here for that, but also I'm just really grateful that the Lord was faithful enough to bring someone in to fill that gap.
That's really great. Okay, so you have a wedding coming up. You have graduation in December.
Yes.
What else exciting is happening in your world right now?
So I've been traveling to Austin a lot recently.
Yeah, tell us about that. I've seen what you've been doing.
Yes, yeah. So we've presented two bills. One of them being to change a clause in the Texas Penal Code to identify an officer. They have it for aggravated assault, but they don't have it for capital murder. So basically, it would just be assumed what an officer looks like without identification, really. Just
Explain
because,
what you mean. I'm confused.
So basically, at the trial, the defense made the argument that Jaime did not know my dad was a police officer.
Okay.
And so basically, we want to add a clause into the capital murder definition in the Texas Penal Code that basically says, an officer by its uniform, its badge, the car lights, all of those things. basically you can assume it is a police officer. While also if they say, hi, my name is whatever, I'm a police officer. So basically, they have that in every other category in the Texas Penal Code besides capital murder. And so we are hoping to get that changed, and it'll be called the Officer Richard Houston II Act. So basically, our prayer is that no family ever has to hear that argument in trial again, because the defense did a great job in trial. And I remember like my stomach dropping, like, oh my goodness, like, what if we don't receive justice for this? And so that's one bill that we have introduced, and then it passed through the Senate. It's now to the House. It's pending with the House. We're waiting for that to be passed through, and then it will be official. And then the second bill we have, I guess, presented is for Highway 635 that runs through Mesquite to be the Officer Richard Houston Memorial Highway. So
I love that so much. I see those signs and they never mean anything to me on a personal level.
Right.
And so I can only imagine how special that would be to have that portion of the highway honoring your father.
Yeah.
So huge. So do you have like a business suit that you put on when you come down here? Like,
oh yeah.
Like, oh, girl.
We are business, all business.
I love it. I love it. Man, it is just crazy to think how God has just thrust you in to this world, and how you can look back and see how he was preparing you for this all along the way, you know, and to see that like the stuff that everything you're doing is not just come easy or natural, but God has set a plan in place for this to be happening.
Yeah.
And so it's so beautiful to watch. Well, Shelby, I am just so proud of you and the way that you're handling this, while also grieving and planning a wedding and trying to graduate college and all of the major things in your life going on. I'd love to hear from you. What are you loving these days, or what are you reading?
So I am currently reading Wild at Heart. If you have a husband, a brother, a son, it's great. It basically just tells you how a man is wired, because they are very different than women. And so it's kind of helped me prepare to just be the best wife that I can be. And so I love that book. I also have been, me and Will, my fiance, have been going through the Marriage Devotional by Levi Lusko. And so we love him. We love his stuff. And so also we are just getting, like I said, all wedding things, all house things planned. And so Target has this line by Studio McGee. If you haven't shopped there, you need to. It is just the best line ever. All house things, decor. It's beautiful.
Are y'all moving into an apartment or a house or what?
Yeah, so it's basically a little townhome. It's in Kaufman, Texas. And so, but we love it. It's been awesome. So we're excited to do all the house stuff together.
So exciting. Well, I'm going to send you guys a copy of my marriage book. Okay. So I will send that to you guys as well. Shelby, I'm so grateful for you and your story. And I know this has been a huge encouragement. Thank you for rounding out our conversations about incarceration from a victim standpoint, from on the other side. And the thing that I love about every show that's come out these last 2 weeks, every single show has been saturated with Jesus. And there's hope for Jesus no matter where you fall on the side of the law, whether you are a victim or a criminal. That Jesus is the same for everybody. And that's, I think, my biggest prayer, Shelby, as I've been having these conversations, is that people, especially followers of Jesus, would adjust the way they see people who are different than them. And that's what you're doing every time you walk into those prisons, is you're saying, I see you as a human.
Yes, and I think something that I've kind of lived by recently is treat people like Jesus died for them. And so that's been huge in prison ministry, and it needs to be true of our lives as believers, as we've got to treat people like Jesus died for them.
Because it changes the way we treat, it changes the way we see them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, you'll have to keep us updated on whenever you get to go see Jaime and how that goes. I'd love to hear how that goes. Shelby, thanks for coming on the Happy Hour.
Yes, thank you for having me.